In the 1997 draft, the San Antonio Spurs had the #1 pick and they decided to go with the 6'11" big man out of Wake Forest named Tim Duncan. Soon after his #1 pick, Tim Duncan ended up winning the Rookie of the Year. Not too long after that, he ended up being the Finals MVP and his first NBA champion, and a slew of other accomplishments soon followed. But just like a lot of other things, it had to come to an end, and on July 11, 2016, Tim Duncan decided to put a close in the final chapter of his illustrious career. Now, I think it's very clear that Tim Duncan is one of the greatest players of all time, especially over the last 15 years, but where exactly he stands is still up for debate. People normally peg him as the greatest power forwards of all time, but even some people still find that debatable. Me personally, I feel like Tim Duncan is one of the greatest big men of all time. Everything from his accomplishments, his accolades, his numbers, and just all around great play for an extended period of time proves the fact that Tim Duncan actually is one of the greatest big men to ever play the game of basketball. And if you don't believe me, well, that's why you clicked on this video. Here are 4 reasons why Tim Duncan is one of the greatest big men of all time. Normally when young players enter the league, we give them some form of time to develop and kind of mature into the body that they have, and understandably so, because it does take a while for players, especially young players, to develop at an NBA level. But crazy enough, Tim Duncan wasn't afforded that luxury. He was put on a team that was expected to win immediately, and because of that, it pushed him to another level of greatness. Now, Tim Duncan's first 6 years are so ridiculous and it's so phenomenal that it's hard to put in perspective, but I'm going to try my best to do so. So on the screen right now, you see Tim Duncan's first 6 years stats and his total numbers that he put up. Everything from 10,000 points to 5,000 rebounds are just ridiculous to say the least. To put into perspective, Tim Duncan numbers are so crazy that there are certain players in the NBA right now who have played for a pretty long time, such as Marc Gasol, who haven't been able to put up the amount of numbers that Tim Duncan has put up in his first 6 years within his whole entire career. Another example is LaMarcus Aldridge, where you can look at his first 9 years with the Portland Trail Blazers, and even his numbers are comparable at best to Tim Duncan's first 6 years. So because of this, I'm not going to compare Tim Duncan's numbers to nobody in the NBA today. Because if I did so, it just really and truly wouldn't be fair, because to be completely honest with people, there aren't that many great players in the NBA today that compare to Tim Duncan, let alone big men. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare Tim Duncan numbers to other great big men in the league since Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And as you clearly can see, Tim Duncan's numbers are pretty comparable to some of these all-time greats. Now there are a few players such as Shaq who put up a tad bit more numbers, and maybe a few more rebounds got grabbed by a couple other players here and there, but for the most part, Tim Duncan's numbers do compare very well against these all-time greats. But the thing that really separates Duncan from a lot of other players in the league is that what he was able to accomplish in his accolades in the first 6 years of his career. In his first 6 years, Tim Duncan was a Rookie of the Year. He led the league in rebound in the 01-02 season. He was a 5-time All-Star. He was an MVP of an All-Star game. He was a 2-time MVP, a 2-time champion, and a 2-time Finals MVP. So with the numbers that he put up, along with his accolades, you can honestly admit that in the first 6 years, Tim Duncan had a resume that could rival some all-time greats that are in the Hall of Fame. To be honest with people, it does take a very, very long time for a player to not only develop to play on an NBA level, but to play on an MVP level in the NBA. And for some players, it takes even longer for them to understand what type of physical condition they have to be in to play all the way up to the NBA Finals. The fact that Tim Duncan was able to do this within the first 6 years should just really and truly speak volumes to the type of player that he is. And again, this doesn't very rarely happen, let alone against big men, so you can already see how great Tim Duncan is. Now when it comes to Tim Duncan and his greatness, a lot of people do question if he's really that great, or if it's just the greatness of the San Antonio Spurs that make him look a tad bit more better than what he really is. Now in the last 20 years, the San Antonio Spurs have been to the playoffs nearly every year except for once, been to the NBA Finals 6 times, and they've won 5 championships. And within that time frame, a whole bunch of great players from David Robertson, Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili, Kawhi Leonard, LaMarcus Aldridge have been in the locker room of the San Antonio Spurs to aid Tim Duncan in his process of continuously winning. But as I see it, normally when an organization or a player reach that level of success, it's normally met with at least, at the bare minimum, 2 all-time great players, which within that time frame, the San Antonio Spurs really never had for a lengthy period of time. Sure, David Robinson had his moments, but by the time Tim Duncan entered the league, David Robinson was coming off a major injury that ended up altering his career for the rest of his time in the NBA. On top of that, he really was towards the end of his career anyway, so he really wasn't a quote-unquote all-time great. Then of course you have Kawhi Leonard, but again, just like David Robinson, Kawhi Leonard was only in the league for 5 years while Tim Duncan was active. So again, even though Kawhi Leonard can be an all-time great, Tim Duncan really and truly didn't benefit the full potential from Kawhi Leonard. But most of us know Tim Duncan's greatest teammates as Tony Parker and Manu Ginobili, two foreign guards that really and truly did alter Tim Duncan's career for the better. Now, I'm not trying to take nothing away from Tony Parker and Manu Ginobili, but once you start to look at other big men and the players that they had and the amount of success that they received, then you'll start to understand how much Tim Duncan might have actually carried than you actually believe. Dating all the way back to the 50s and 60s, where Bill Russell had teammates such as Bob Cousy, Sam Jones, John Havlicek. Then moving forward to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, where he entered the league with Oscar Robertson, then finished his career with the Lakers with Magic Johnson, James Worthy, Michael Cooper. Then you have Moses Malone, who for the most part in the beginning of his career when he was with Houston did carry a lot, but of course he ended up his career with the Philadelphia 76ers, where he had Mo Cheeks, Julius Erving, Charles Barkley. Then he moved forward beyond that with the Atlanta Hawks, where he had Dominique Wilkins. And then you have Shaq. I mean, Jesus Christ, Shaq played with damn near every great guard that you could possibly play with for the past, 15-20 years. Everybody from Penny Hardaway to Kobe Bryant, Dwayne Wade, Steve Nash, LeBron James, and of course the Big Three in Boston. Now, of course, there are other big men such as Wilt Chamberlain and Hakeem Olajuwon who had a lot of success, but not really as much as Tim Duncan and the rest of those players had in the postseason. The level of success I'm referring to is making the playoffs consistently, always being a contender, and making the finals roughly 3 to 4 times within your time in the league. So looking at it through that perspective, you can clearly see that Tony Parker and Manu Ginobili, as great as they are, they really and truly aren't as great as some of the other help that a lot of other big men had. They're not Bob Cousy, they're not Oscar Robertson or Magic Johnson, Julius Erving, or Kobe Bryant, LeBron James. They're solid guards, Hall of Famers, but they're not none of those great players. As a matter of fact, you can make a huge argument that Tony Parker and Manu Ginobili, as great as they are, they probably benefit more out of anybody else on being on a team with Tim Duncan and the San Antonio Spurs. Because to be completely honest with people, if Tony Parker and Manu Ginobili played for any other team, would they really and truly be Hall of Famers? Now, when it comes to big men in the NBA, one of their worst attributes is aging, simply because they're big, they're tall, they have a lot of weight on them, and normally around the age of 30, that is a turning point for a lot of their careers. And normally their level of greatness is scaled on what they can accomplish after the age of 30, because once 30 hits, it's kind of downhill from there. But crazy enough, that really didn't apply to Tim Duncan. From 30 to the point where he's at right now, Tim Duncan had a pretty successful career, averaging 16 points, nearly 10 rebounds, 3 assists, a steal, and almost 2 blocks. You could quite honestly say that his numbers are still relatively consistent from where he was 30 to when he first got into the league. Not only that, when you compare his numbers to a lot of other greats such as Shaquille O'Neal, Hakeem Olajuwon, Patrick Ewing, Moses Malone, and David Robertson, his numbers are still comparable to some of the greatest players we've seen since Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. But again, the thing that separates him from a lot of other great big men in this league are the accolades that he was able to accomplish within this time frame. He was a 7-time All-Star, 3 NBA Finals appearances, 2 NBA championships, and he was still being selected for all NBA teams all the way up to the 2014-2015 season. In the 2014-2015 season, he was selected for the All-Defensive NBA second team, and also he was selected for the All-NBA third team. With those selections, that made him 1, the oldest player to be selected for an All-NBA team, and 2, it tied for the most NBA teams ever selected at 15. But if that's still not impressive enough for you, let's take a deeper look into what he was able to accomplish in those 2 years when they went to the finals with the Miami Heat. Now, as we all know, when it came to winning a championship against the Miami Heat the first go around, the San Antonio Spurs did fail, but Tim Duncan actually came to play. In the last 3 games of the 2013 NBA Finals, Tim Duncan putting up numbers such as 24 points, nearly 14 rebounds, an assist, nearly 2 steals, a block, and ended up clocking in 41 minutes. And again, he did this at the age of 37. And as we all know, the next year they end up going back-to-back to the finals and they end up winning the NBA championship. At this point, Tim Duncan was 38, which makes him the second most oldest noticeable big man to ever win an NBA championship. Which again is pretty amazing, because once you start to really take in what he was able to do once he was past the age of 30, it is quite remarkable. Again, there are players in the NBA today who have been in the league for the last 10 to 12 years who haven't been able to accomplish what Tim Duncan accomplished after the age of 30. So again, the level of greatness that we're speaking on is very, very high. A lot of people limit Tim Duncan's greatness to only power forwards, and I just don't understand that at all. Tim Duncan is one of the greatest big men of all time, not just because the numbers back it up, but because he's actually a big man. A huge reason why I wanted to make this video is not just because Tim Duncan retired, but because Shaq recently had a few words on Tim Duncan on considering him a big man or not considering him a big man.
I only have one beef with how they're throwing this around. They're saying he's one of the greatest big men. Do you count power forwards as big men? Because I don't.
It depends, though.
No, it depends on nothing. I don't. You're not a big man.
Is Karl Malone a big man?
No, he's not. He's a power forward. He's a power forward. Charles Barkley, power forward.
So they're not big men.
Listen, I was always taught that the big man was the center. I know we got new rules and they don't have center spot no more, but no, I'm not going with that.
Okay.
Now I understand what Shaq is getting at. I really and truly wouldn't categorize Charles Barkley, Kevin Garnett, Shawn Kemp, Amari Stoudemire as quote-unquote big men, so I get it. But there are still a few major problems with what Shaq is saying, and it does pain me to say so because I don't really like to disagree or go back and forth with all-time great players simply because I've never played in the NBA. But for one, why are we minimizing Tim Duncan's greatness because his skill set is so vast it left him flexible enough to play power forward and center? That shouldn't take away from how great he is. Limiting him to only one position does nothing more but minimize how great of a player he is in the NBA. 2. Tim Duncan is a center. Tim Duncan is 6'11", 250 to 60 pounds. That is a height and weight of a stereotypical center. Not only that, Tim Duncan, when he first came in the league, played power forward because David Robinson was there. But that doesn't thus make him a power forward. It just means that the Spurs had 2 very talented big men and they wanted to play both of them on the court at the exact same time. With this logic, that means that Ralph Sampson or Hakeem Olajuwon is a power forward because when they first came into the league, they were both on the same team with one another, and as we both know, both of them are actual quote-unquote big men. And if you don't want to believe that, please let me know. In the past 10 years, if Tim Duncan has been the power forward for the San Antonio Spurs, then who has been the center? I need to know this because I've gone through the depth charts, I've looked at everything that I can, all the screenshots of their lineups, and as far as I understand, Tim Duncan is a 5. He's been playing the quote-unquote big man role for at least the past 10 to 12 years. But third and finally, Tim Duncan's accolades and his numbers are quite comparable to some of the greatest bigs that we've seen in this league since Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Some of them are actually comparable to Kareem himself. I mean, in some categories, Tim Duncan is better than Shaquille O'Neal, Hakeem Olajuwon, Moses Malone, Patrick Ewing. And so again, to take away from what he does on the court just because he started his career as a power forward makes no sense, because just looking at his numbers, they actually compare up with Shaq pretty well. Not only that, when you think about a big man, you think about somebody who protects the rim, who scores inside, and who rebounds really well. If you actually compare Tim Duncan's numbers to some of the other great power forwards in this league, such as Charles Barkley, Dirk Nowitzki, Kevin Garnett, Karl Malone, some of the numbers are not even close. So again, comparing him to those players just doesn't make any sense because his skill set doesn't really aid him to be compared to such players. And also, not to really diminish how great those power forwards are, but let's just be honest. Comparing Tim Duncan to Dirk Nowitzki doesn't hold the same weight as comparing Tim Duncan to Shaquille O'Neal or Hakeem Olajuwon. So there you have it, everybody. 4 reasons why Tim Duncan is one of the greatest big men this game has ever seen. Regardless if you view him as a power forward or a center, please do not disrespect how great that man is, because he has put in work for over the past 20 years. And with that being said, I got to give 2 shout outs. The first one does go to Tim Duncan. Thank you, Tim Duncan. If you are watching this, I highly doubt you are, but I'm just going to say it anyway. Thank you, Tim Duncan, for the past 20 years of hard work, determination, dedication that you have given this game of basketball that I love so much and so dearly. It's been an honor and a privilege to watch you work and operate and play at such a high level. The fact that I can grow old and tell my kids that I watch one of the greatest big men the game has ever seen means more to me than you probably ever will know. Also, shout out to the people who are watching my videos, liking it, leaving comments, all this other stuff, sharing my videos. Man, it's crazy. I'm already at 5K. I've only put out a few videos, and it's been ridiculous. The growth has been there. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like. If you want to be updated on all the videos that I upload on the channel, please subscribe. And as always, follow me on Twitter, not only to be updated on the videos that I upload, but I also love to tweet about the NBA. So if you feel like, you know, that's your thing, then go ahead and just follow me on Twitter. And I'll see y'all next time. Peace.